Alrighty, we're going to start today with a basic overview of all of the elements of design. Normally in exploratory art or in drawing and painting or mixed media, we would spend a little bit more time talking about each one of these individually, but in a sculpture class, most of the elements of design are decorative, and we'll talk about that a little bit too. So your basic elements of design, the building blocks that you need to create any piece of artwork are line, which is a flat path through space. You can think about that as a way to get from like point A to point B. A shape, which is an enclosed line. So if that line goes from point A back to point A. There's two types. There's geometric shapes and there are organic shapes. Color is the visible range of light. So it's basically what our eyes can see and perceive. Value is how light or dark an area is. Texture is the quality of a surface, and that can be either imagined or like the actual quality of the surface. Space is the area above, below, around, and within a piece of artwork. And then form is when something actually takes up three-dimensional space, when something has a height, a width, and a depth. Some examples of line. There's lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of different kinds of line. You can have long lines and short lines, dashed lines, thick lines, thin lines, curvy lines, ziggy-zaggy lines, spiral lines, parallel lines, perpendicular lines, vertical, horizontal, diagonal, etc., etc., etc. There's lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of different types of lines. You can layer lines on top of each other. You can create some of the other elements that we'll talk about. You can create line with, so value, for example, texture, for example, also use line. Shape. These are the enclosed lines that I was talking about. The difference between shape and form: shape is when it's on a two-dimensional or flat surface, and a form is when it, again, takes up actual space. Geometric shapes, I usually call those math class shapes. So these are shapes that have very specific rules. They have strict definitions. So like a square has a really strict definition. It's got 4 sides that are equal in length and all meet at 90 degrees. So no matter where you live in the world, you would be able to come up with what a square looks like following that set of rules and that definition. Organic shapes, however, are kind of everything else. Organic shapes are if you were to be traced, like if you were to lay down on the ground and I traced around you, you would be an organic shape. Trees, bunnies, cats, if you trace around your hand like those corny hand turkeys that you did as an elementary school kid, those are all organic shapes. Most shapes are organic shapes. Color. This is the one that I love the best. I could talk about color for forever. So the visible range of light is actually just a really, really teeny tiny little sliver of the entire band of light. Our eyes and brains can only perceive a really, really, really small section, and that's what we call visible light. On one side, you have infrared, and on the other side, you have ultraviolet, which these may be phrases that you've heard before, but basically what that means is what the length of the wave is, and the height of that wave will give you different colors, and how that light bounces off of objects and then back into your eye, onto your retina, into your optic nerve, and then into your brain determines what color you are seeing and perceiving. In art, we arrange color into a color wheel. Basically, your visible range of light is a rainbow. And with a color wheel, we take that rainbow and we turn it in on itself. And this helps give us an idea of how colors relate both to each other and among each other. And interestingly enough, color theory is both art and science. How colors relate to each other, how those different wavelengths of light interact with each other, how they interact with our brains, and how we perceive them. It's really interesting and fascinating stuff. Talk about color for a really long time, but we'll skip to value. Value is the relative lightness or darkness of an area. The big way that my classes usually use value is in drawing to show highlights and shadows. But as you're mixing up colors too, if you were to be mixing with paints, you can of course mix up. If you add black to a color, you're creating a shade. If you mix white to a color, you're creating a tint. And those can help give paintings and drawings the idea that an object is three-dimensional by playing around with those values. Value also can help our brains interpret how close or how far away an object is. And you've got a couple of different value scales here on this slide. Space can be really difficult to kind of wrap your head around on a flat surface because space is all an illusion on a flat surface. So on the left-hand side, I have some geometric forms, although it's just a drawing. So I've got a cone, I've got a pyramid, a sphere, and a cube. And the way that space is being represented on this, and for your assignment this week, this is how I recommend you use space. It's just kind of the easiest way to show it, is by overlapping. So by putting one object in front of another object, you're creating the illusion of space. It's a really easy way to show that something is in front of something else. Another way that you can show space pretty easily, and I also recommend this for your project, is something called relative size. So things that are closer to you appear larger, and as they get further away, they appear smaller and smaller and smaller. So this is a really easy way to also show space or something receding into the distance. You can, of course, combine both of these. Oh gosh, that was not a great. And you can play around with both overlapping and relative size. So we know that this square is closest to us, it looks biggest. And then as these squares both overlap each other and recede into the distance, they get a little bit smaller, and then they look like they're further away. Another way, of course, that you can show space is through a more mathematical approach. It's called linear perspective. And linear perspective is if you use a vanishing point along a horizon line. Some of you guys have learned about that in mixed media art classes before. That's where you've got the horizon line and a point, and all of your horizontal lines come back to that vanishing point. This is a really easy way to show space if you're drawing like buildings or a cityscape. Texture. This is the quality of a surface, and there's two types of texture. The first one is an implied texture, which means you are looking at something that is fake, but it looks like it has a texture. For example, if you were to have this particular slide projected onto your screen at home, and we looked at this little square drawing here, it looks like a wood grain. It looks like it would be rough, but if you actually went over and touched it, it would be smooth like your computer screen. So a lot of furniture, I usually use the classroom tables as an example. They look like they have a wood grain texture to them, but they're actually plastic. So when you touch the top of them, it's smooth, just like plastic would be. It's got a fake texture on it. You can have fake texture for like a brick pattern or stone patterns and stuff like that too. So you can draw patterns on. One way that you can do texture for this is with something called crayon rubbings. So if you take a crayon and you turn it on its side and you put it over a rough surface and you rub over it, you can come up with an implied texture. So if you did that rubbing and then you ran your hand over the rubbing, it wouldn't actually feel bumpy or rough. It would be smooth and have a little bit of wax on it. Actual textures, which as sculpture students and as artists, is one of the things that you would have to deal with because your objects would have to be, like either intentionally smooth, intentionally rough, whatever. Here's some examples of actual texture in fabric. So you can think about the difference between maybe a pair of corduroy jeans, a pair of leggings, the texture of a sweater, what that might feel like. So the quality of a surface, what it feels like, or what it looks like it would feel like. And then our final element is form. And as sculpture students, this is the one that you would be spending the most time with. Form is when an object actually takes up three-dimensional space. So it has a height, a width, a depth. You can pick it up. And just like shapes, there are geometric shapes. These are your math class shapes. These are shapes that your math teacher would ask you to like find the volume of a cylinder that is 8 inches tall. Or find the volume of a sphere that has a diameter of 22 inches, whatever. And then there are also organic shapes. So you're an organic shape. This is an organic shape right here. It doesn't follow strict rules, but you'll notice that it's got interesting details and holes in it. This is why also for this week I need you to take a look at how to photograph your artwork well. Because as sculpture students, when you're making work at home and submitting it online, you're going to have to take pictures of your work from at least 2 different angles. So looking at it from maybe the front, from the back, maybe the side and the front, just to give me a sense of what the form looks like. How does it take up 3-dimensional space? So that is a really quick overview of the elements of design.